You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. I don't talk in real life about having hoarding disorder, so I talk about it on this podcast instead. And because I'm anonymous, I can talk really, really honestly. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Dear Episode 1 me, I could still feel how terrified and alone you felt when you first picked up your phone and recorded some thoughts about hoarding for what became this podcast. That was in 2021. You were afraid, you were isolated, you didn't understand this thing that had you so stuck and ashamed. You knew from those awful TV shows that what you had was hoarding disorder and you had no idea what to do about it. You knew really that you weren't the only one, but you still kind of believed you were. You also believed that there was no way through it. You recorded the first episode, but you never thought anybody would listen. You mostly just needed somewhere to say things that otherwise felt completely unsayable. Somehow, I'm talking to you from episode 200. You can't imagine that right now, and I can barely believe it, even though I know it's true. You were so anxious and hopeless with no idea what to do other than put your voice into the world. So you pressed record. You started talking. And you have no idea what you just set in motion. When you recorded that first episode, you didn't understand hoarding disorder. Not really. You knew you were living inside it and drowning in it. But you couldn't make sense of it or name its parts. You didn't know the terminology. You didn't know the research. You didn't understand why this was happening or what it meant or whether there was any way through it. You just knew that you were scared and ashamed and exhausted from carrying this alone. Now I've learnt what hoarding disorder actually is, how it functions, why it holds on so tightly and why letting go is so hard. I've learnt language and gained insights that must seem impossible to you. And more than that, I've learnt that there are others. I've even learnt not to battle quite so much with my inner critic. That, like all of this, has been a whole process. But you do come to realise that either arguing with it or giving in and agreeing with it are both exhausting and disheartening and counterproductive. Like many things, it's a work in progress, but you will start seeing it in a different way and managing the onslaught in a different way when you can. I wish I could tell you that by episode 200 it's all fixed, that the hoarding is gone, that everything is resolved, and that there's a neat ending to tie up all loose ends. But that's not how this works. You knew that this wasn't a problem with a simple solution. What I can tell you is that you're going to learn so much. You're going to learn through the podcast and then in your wider life to let people see that you're not always fine. You're going to learn to talk about hard things before you've fixed them rather than afterwards. Over these 200 episodes, you're going to build up such a detailed understanding of hoarding disorder that you can't even fathom right now. You'll learn about the neuroscience, the psychology, the overlaps with trauma and grief and ADHD and autism and anxiety and all sorts of things. You'll learn why letting go can feel impossible, but you'll also learn why you have to. You'll learn why the objects matter so much and why shame makes everything worse. You'll develop a vocabulary for what's happening to you, and that vocabulary will help you to make a kind of map that may not necessarily take you out of the woods, but will help you find your way through the woods. You'll finally start to understand the terrain, and even when you can't always seem to change the patterns of behavior and thoughts, you can at least identify them and recognize them for what they are. But there's something else that has happened because you recorded that first episode, and it kind of changes everything. I need you to know that you're not alone with this. Right now, you firmly believe that you're the only one. Rationality might tell you that you're not, but you deeply feel that you are. You think no one could possibly understand this. But please listen to this bit, even if you can't hear the rest. In your future, 400,000 times someone has pressed play on your voice, on your story. Even occasionally your wisdom. The conversations you have, the guests you invite, the words you speak. Some of those 400,000 times, someone has heard you and thought, I'm not alone either. One of the things that starts to chip away at that overwhelming sense of shame you have is that you expect every guest you invite onto the show to think you are disgusting and repulsive. And then you speak to them and they don't. These are people who know your secret and they don't react with horror. They react with thoughtfulness and kindness and brilliant information and advice. From those early, shaky, terrible recordings, a whole community has grown. Listeners write in, they share their own stories. And they'll say things to you like, it's like you're inside my head. Or how did you know I feel like that? And you know because you do too. People listen and feel less alone. But it all helps you to feel less alone too. You also set up accountability calls where people get together, and that's a whole community of its own. For many of us, it's the only space in our lives where we can talk honestly about our experiences and feelings about our stuff with other people in the same situation. You, episode 1 me, are going to build a community, an actual community of people who understand, people who get it in a way that you can't currently imagine. And some of these listeners and guests are going to become real friends, close friends, people you laugh with and people you trust with the hardest parts of yourself. People who understand that you have this particular struggle and still show you love and respect and care about your life inside and outside of hoarding. That connection between the community you've built and your day-to-day existence will help to chip away at the shame you feel. It doesn't erase it completely, but it does reduce it, even just a tiny bit. And a tiny bit matters more than you can know right now. Because right now, you think you should feel shame. You think the shame is deserved, and it would be wrong not to. That changes too. You can't see it now because you're so closed in on yourself, but you're about to find some really important people in your life. They're out there, waiting to find you too. And you're going to help other people. You, episode 1 me, terrified and uncertain, are going to create something that genuinely helps other people. When you're lying awake at 3 a.m. feeling like you're failing at everything, somewhere, someone is listening to your podcast and feeling less ashamed, less alone. Someone is finding the courage to ask for help. Someone is understanding themselves better because you took that step and spoke. In those early minutes of confessing things you'd never before said out loud, You've created something that matters. You are starting to build a resource that didn't exist before. One that helps people feel less alone. One that makes space for honesty and healing, both listeners and your own. That's no small thing. You do that. The resource you're building is not just for yourself. It's for everyone. I do want to be honest with you. It's still incredibly hard. Living with hoarding disorder, dealing with it day after day, trying to make progress, doesn't stop being difficult. There are going to be days when you feel like you haven't moved forward at all. Days when the shame comes flooding back. Days when you look around your space and feel nothing but defeated. Hoarding is still complicated, overwhelming and exhausting. You still get disheartened and hopeless regularly, but you will carry wisdom that you don't currently feel you have. You will carry information, confidence, and self-trust. And you will carry the voices of others who know what this feels like. You won't have to hold it all on your own anymore. So much as I'd like to tell you that everything works out fine by episode 200, I can't. I've been really unwell this year, and I still really struggle with a lot of this stuff. I do a lot better at understanding why I have some of the thoughts and behaviours I have, and I do a lot better at curbing those patterns of behaviour. But my home is not fixed, my brain is not fixed. But please trust me that by episode 200, you'll have things you don't have now. You'll have wisdom, you'll have information. You'll even have a slowly growing confidence in yourself. Not least because you've been showing up for yourself for 200 episodes. That counts for a lot. You'll know things. You'll know to take it step by step. You'll know that shame is like adding petrol to a fire. You'll know that getting rid of stuff is only one part of recovery. You'll know that your worth isn't determined by the state of your home. You'll know that a lack of cleanliness and orderliness is not a moral failing. You'll know that progress isn't linear, though you'll wish it was. You'll know that what's needed is action, even when it's tiny. You'll also have allies, and not just in the form of guests and listeners. Because here's something you absolutely won't believe. You are going to tell people, real people, in real life about your hoarding. I know that feels impossible. The secrecy feels essential, but it's also part of the shame that keeps you trapped. But by episode 200, 3 actual people in your life will know. It's still mostly a secret, sure, but 3 real people know about the podcast and about your hoarding, and they haven't run away. They haven't judged you the way you feared they would. In fact, they've carried on loving you just like they did before. You are still painfully and often self-destructively self-reliant, but this bit of your life is no longer completely compartmentalized from everybody, just most people. And it turns out that makes an incredible difference. Whether that's people you already know, who now know about the hoarding, or people you met through the podcast who now know about the rest of your life. You've also learned a lot about podcasting. You no longer mutter into your phone. You have a proper microphone and everything. You know how to edit audio. You still hate transcribing the episodes, but you still do it because it's important. So here's what I need you to know, episode 1 me. What you did in making that first episode matters. Starting this podcast, speaking your truth, showing up vulnerable and scared, it matters. Not just for the community you're going to build, but for you, for us. So here in episode 200, I want to say well done, and I want to say thank you. Thank you for being gutsy enough to start, even though you thought you had nothing to say that was of any value, and you definitely thought nobody was going to listen. Thank you for letting your fear and confusion become words, for pressing record despite it all. It's because you did that that a whole world has opened up. You have taken the first step on a journey that is going to be longer and harder even than you imagine, but that's also going to be richer and more connected and more meaningful. You've planted a terrifying seed, but it's going to grow into something you can't picture yet, that I still can't really picture. You feel alone right now, and in many ways you are alone, but you also feel like no one understands and that no one ever could. 199 episodes later, I can tell you that that bit you might actually have been wrong about. People do understand. Some people even feel exactly the same as you do. You pressed record. You started talking. You did good, girl. With so much love and respect for your courage. Me now. Thank you for being here for episode 200. Whether you have been listening since episode 1 or you found me yesterday, I'm so glad you are part of this community. You're part of what makes this possible and keeps me putting something out every Friday, come rain or shine. And wherever you are with your own journey with hoarding disorder, you're not alone either. With particular thanks to former podcast guests who are in alphabetical order to avoid any hint of favouritism. Thank you to Jatting Joe, Elizabeth Nelson, Harriet Impey, Heather Matwatso, Jan Eppingstall, Jasmine Slay, Jenna Overbar, Jennifer Kraft, Joe Cavallo, Joe Cook, Casey Davis, Kendra Adachi, Laura Silverstein, Leslie Spellman, Luna Dolezal, Mary Dozier, Meg Kissack, Paige Pritchard, Sam, Sharon Moraine, Steve Chapman, Susie Bootle, Tracy McCubbin, and Victoria Ruby Granger. Okay, thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.